A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing. One important thing. One important thing.
Welcome to the Spiritual Hedgehog podcast, where we explore the role philosophy and faith play in your daily life. Here are your hosts, Ira Gardner and Pastor Eric Dahl.
Welcome to today's episode of the Spiritual Hedgehog, and today we're going to be talking about callings. And Eric, you've been doing some work at St. Mark's with regards to the idea of callings. Could you talk about that project?
Yeah, we've been working. There's a big Lilly Foundation grant that is going through universities and now congregations. That's really trying to connect Sunday to Monday, trying to think about how we live our faith through the week. I think often mainline traditions aren't great about thinking about their spirituality after Sundays. And so, as Lutherans, trying to think about what gives us purpose, what gives us meaning in our day-to-day lives. Lutherans have a really long tradition of thinking about vocation, which would be the churchy sort of word for calling, which is what it means. It comes from vocare, which means to call. And it's also where we get like different words like advocate or invocation, or a lot of those related words to think about to call. What does that mean? And I think what got me excited about it is we had a few members that brought this to us, including our former bishop that brought this meaning to us. And we started talking about, there's been books, maybe you'll remember that book that came out probably 10 years ago now, A Purpose-Driven Life, and was trying to really think about what gives meaning and purpose. And for us, it's thinking about, there's sort of two, if you think about the Reformation and think about these two big pillars. The first pillar of that Reformation, really that Luther started, was this idea of, first of all, is there a God? And if there is a God, what kind of God is there? And for Luther, he had to move from this idea of this judgmental, severe God that you are afraid of and terrified of, that might send you to hell, to this understanding as he read through Romans and Ephesians that we really have a gracious and loving God. And then the second pillar is the one we're talking about. It's really this pillar of vocation, of meaning and purpose. So if we have a God and you figure out what kind of God we have, then how does that influence us in the purpose we have in the various aspects or realms, or maybe you use the word stations in your life? So, for instance, maybe what I would ask you, Iris, to think about what are some of the different callings you've had in your life? And how did those sort of evolve over time? Would you say you have yourself a call story of thinking about that? And if not, that's okay, but I'm just kind of curious.
Well, actually, I have spent a lot of time, particularly over the last couple of years, really thinking about this idea of calling and this idea of, is there a way that I was uniquely made, that I'm hardwired to be, and that is there a way to be in alignment with that in order to have a more harmonious life and existence? And what's interesting for me is that recently I really have identified what my calling is, and it doesn't change the jobs that I do. I think I've been lucky and I've been blessed to have kind of had this nagging idea of what my calling was, and I've kind of always kind of pursued things that were passion based, so to speak. And so I've pursued creativity with my photography career, and I've pursued teaching with my academic teaching career. But what's really fascinating about calling is that it is separate from our vocation and our avocations, but it informs how we approach our vocation. And so when I have really grown to know who I am, what my calling in life is, and in my case, it really is that of a teacher, that everything that I'm about has something to do with conveying or researching ideas of wisdom and compassion. And that is the unifying theme throughout my work. But what's interesting about this is that um, about a year ago, I actually participated in a callings workshop that was given by Lynn Taylor, who is the founder of a psychometric assessment tool that's used in business called the Core Values Index. And, I found the Core Values Index really helpful. It's been very informative, and it's helped in my professional career in many ways. But what was interesting is I did this calling workshop, and Lynn was basically, very upfront that, this is about discovering how God made you. And I won't go through all the minute details of that process, but what I came away with was so profound and unexpected, which was that I had been doing the vocation part. I was in the right vocation, but I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And I didn't fully understand and commit to my calling. And once I figured out what my calling really was, it has absolutely affected every part of my life. And what I found is that I was able to approach my day-to-day life in a much more meaningful and successful way than I'd ever seen before.
Nice. See, so it's interesting to me. I mean, in hearing you tell your story, it's there again. There's a journey aspect to it, but also there's an inquiring that continues to go on as you keep searching for where that connects. It's interesting too. So one of the moves I think I've made is I used to always just hear vocation as the job that we do. And so I actually see a little more synonymous between vocation and calling myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think too often, I think the church sort of stole that for a long time in its history, especially the Catholic Church, stole this idea that if you have a vocation, and if it's a spiritual vocation, you will be a priest, and you will be a brother, and you will follow orders, and you will go through this process. Luther really made a distinction. He wanted to say no. In fact, thinking about calling, both of you are called right where you are, right at that time, which I think kind of fits a little bit what you're talking about. And also, you're called forward into many different aspects. It doesn't mean you're stuck if you're called right where you are right now. You're trying to figure out where that place is that God is speaking to you, and how you can share who you are in the midst of how God has made you. But also to understand that there's a movement always propelling us forward to continue to understand new aspects of who we are, new aspects of our purpose, new aspects of our calling. So Christians now, for a long time, there's this Frederick Buechner quote. Maybe you've heard it, that people really glom onto. It's where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. That's that's your vocation, right? But it's almost this romantic view. Your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger, and just find that little sweet spot, you'll have arrived again. And as you know from talking to me in past podcasts here, I don't think you ever arrive.
Right. Yeah.
However, but I am more and more convinced that our image of God has a direct correlation in how we understand our purpose. And not only our day-to-day purpose as parent, as for me, soccer coach, for me as a sibling, as a friend, all of those things have aspects of calling that I think relate to my spirituality. that relate to how I see and understand God, and how I see and understand where God is leading me in all my different relationships and aspects of my life. So yeah, I think what really excited me about this being brought forward is to say, so often in our culture, it's spirituality is something you do on Sunday, but the deepness of our faith and our faith lives really gets carried out then on what that perception is we have of that God that we tend to think we worship on Sundays. Or if you are Jewish, you worship on Saturdays or Friday nights or whatever your faith background may be. So I'm curious, as you think about your calling story, I mean, do you still think of that calling? Does it stem out of your faith in aspects? Does it stem out of, boy, this seems to be what resonates with me?
Well, so let me share a couple things. One, I think what was so profound for me when I went through this most recent, peeling back the layers of the onion, so to speak, getting to know myself at a deeper level. And I'll tell you what the profound aha moment was in this particular case was recognizing that throughout my career, I had perceived myself as being about being a successful business owner, running a photography studio, etc. And then I knew early on that I wanted to teach, although I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher consciously. I just knew I wanted to be influential in my industry. What was really profound is when I realized what my calling was, which really was teaching, I realized that the reason I had gone through all this work to run businesses, and I've been somewhat of a serial entrepreneur throughout my life, is the fact that, and what really made it personal was the fact that I was, early on, I was essentially following in my father's footsteps of being a photographer, running a business. And I had this aha moment that I realized that I never really was wired to be the business owner. I did it because I wanted to teach my father how to be a successful business owner, because I grew up with my father working really, really hard. I was part of part of the struggle. I mean, at one point I had helped do 3 paper routes to put food on the table. There's a period of time where there's no photos of me, even though my father was a photographer. He didn't have a camera to use for a period of time. So there's a chapter in my life that there are no photos. And so at age 19, I set out on this, hero's journey of opening up a successful photography studio. And I thought it was about the business being in photography. And then I ended up developing a software company. And then, I've done several things. But it was that moment of realizing that actually that's not why I was doing it. I was doing it to learn, grow, and teach and mentor people that needed to be successful as entrepreneurs. And I think once I recognized that, I deepened my understanding of how I was made and where God put me in this world. And I have a position that is, I find it is going deeper into being anchored into who I am and knowing how to relate to others in a very honest and transparent way. And I think that one of the benefits of people discovering their calling and raising their awareness of it is that it gives them the ability to have clear communications, better relationships with themselves and God and with each other. That it's a very deep grounding that I'm still learning about. I mean, it's still a learning process.
Has it changed the way you are as husband, as dad to now a full-grown adult here, and we know each one another's children? Has it changed? Do you see yourself taking parts and aspects of how you changed and formed that to how you now relate in your relationships as well? You compartmentalize more.
Um, I think it's allowed me to know when I can contribute at my best and when to hold back and just hold my words. And I think, and you asked about whether it's improved being a husband or father. I think that, it's not always what you say, it's the things that you let other people discover by not saying. It's the few words not said every day that might
Yeah,
bring the harmony.
yeah. That's
And
smart.
so for me to know that, wait, is this the appropriate time? Is this a teachable moment, and should I be the one teaching it, or should I just let it go and just be aware, and go deeper and just trying to grow my understanding of different circumstances. I will tell you, finding your calling doesn't stop you from being irritated with your son. Um, I
I,
I
well,
love my son dearly, and he is wired 180 degrees opposite of the way I'm wired, but it has deepened my appreciation for him. Uh,
so well, it's interesting is I think I see a different patience in you that maybe wasn't there 10 years ago. And that's, isn't that interesting? Yeah, how we relate to our children. So I think, I think every pastor has a little bit of what I'd call Messiah complex. They think they can save somebody or something. And you find yourself as a parent and doing some of the same things, what irritated my dad about me, I find now irritates me about my son or maybe some of my stepchildren. And just this interesting, I thought, oh, I'll be this perfect, patient, understanding parent. And then boom, it gets, it's like I get who I am and I need reminded again. I need to be regrounded in thinking about how that all plays out. It's curious.
well, what's
I mean,
interesting is for example with my son, where I've this idea of, okay, I know what I'm about, but I also know what I've learned is to wait to be asked. And so what's been interesting is my son has actually started engaging me in deeper conversations and has engaged me in questions and things that have really given me an opportunity to play that important parent role. But that wasn't happening before, when I was just going in and offering unsolicited advice. So I think that for me, it's been about learning that, okay, this is what I'm about, but I need to wait and let people figure out if that's what they need. I need to figure out whether or not what I'm offering is even necessary at the moment. And and so I think it always comes back to this, okay, I need to be in touch with my faith in order to be settled, be calm, and be aware, more self-aware, more reflective, in order to not be as reactive, but rather be responsive. And I think that's where faith plays a role in the daily of, the serenity. Give me give me the serenity of knowing what I can and can't do, and the wisdom to know the difference, so to speak.
yeah,
And I'm butchering that, but you know what I'm saying.
yeah. No, the way, wisdom to know when to keep our mouth shut, when to speak, and what we can change and what we can't, for sure. Yeah, that I think that aspect is right there. But that's, I think trying to figure that out. That's, I mean, that, so with this grant and with this focus, we've started sort of with the tagline, called today, led into tomorrow. So to understand that, yeah, in everything, in every aspect of what we're doing, we are somehow called in that moment. And if you can think about then in the relationship to, what might God be calling me to do and be, and how to act in the midst of this pandemic, for instance. It changes, at least having that question to reshape and change the way I think about things, I have found personally helpful. And I think our hope is then for the people that enter the doors of St. Mark's to be thinking about, what gives meaning and focus is what they're there for. Ultimately, is they want to know, one, they're loved, and two, how do I figure out what I'm supposed to be about in this world? So one of the books that I've been captured with it's a book called Living Lives That Matter. And it's really a collection of essays and, written everywhere from Socrates all the way up to Contempt Bonhoeffer. It just has these different thoughts about how we are called, what gives us purpose, how do we live lives that matter. And what's this interesting dynamic is what I'm finding is the more I get then pushed out into thinking about my faith Monday to Saturday, for me as a person of faith, of the Christian faith or Lutheran faith specifically, the more I need Sunday to recenter me, to help me refocus and go, I understand Sabbath in a way I never quite understood before, and the need just to be able to breathe deeply God's Spirit in a time, in a place, and realize both it's about me, of what I'm called to do, but also sometimes it's just not about me. So I guess that's kind of how I come in thinking about, as you're talking about, when to speak, when to listen to our kids. It's the same thing with my son. Just as he gets older, I find myself learning from him quite a bit as he pushes maybe some of my comfort level on things. And yet I think he also values sort of the interplay of things that I have to offer in a way that he didn't before. At least I hope that's true. And that's sort of the goal there. Have you
Well, what's
known?
interesting is, because of this grant that you have, has really given us an opportunity to collaborate on this callings project.
Right.
And I have really, I've talked in a previous episode of just the impact people have had in my life that I realized were deeply grounded and had a powerful faith. Well, what's interesting is we talked about this calling project, and I've had an opportunity to go out and interview some of the members of St. Mark's who are doing some really important work in the community. And I've been able to ask them some questions about how it is they go about doing their work, how is it they work through the challenging situations. And there is this universal response, which is that they're saying a prayer as they're doing it. I mean, it's really it's been really beautiful and deeply moving to be talking with people that are doing some really incredible things out in the community, in healthcare and pastoral care, that they understand, they have a deep understanding of their calling, and they have a deep understanding of where that calling is coming from, and where is the source of tapping into that. And that's through their faith is where they're tapping into it.
To me, it's story. It's story, how we learn and start to put those pictures together by hearing one another's stories. And I think that's one of the things I'm trying to encourage folks. That's why I asked you early on about thinking, tell me about your call story. And I'm finding more and more that people do have some sort of story that has said, boy, I've lost that sense of meaning and purpose, or I'm still looking for that. Yeah, I think about my own story. People, it's the question pastors will get all the time, tell me how you received your calling. Right. So I've had to think about it, and I've always wished I had a more kind of defining story that, God was whispering in my dreams, Eric, I want you to be a pastor. It's not how, for most of us, I don't think that's how it happens. I think sometimes people can hear really those clear call it voices. But for me, it really built a relationship from my youth and being part of a called Encounter Christ, seeing that people responded to me differently when we would be talking Bible studies, or if I was sharing my doubts about something and engaging in different ways. And then I was going to be a teacher, and thought, I was kind of following in my dad's footsteps, interesting a lot. He was a guidance counselor. Thought, well, maybe I want to do something counseling wise or teaching wise, until I had one of my mentors say, Eric, you would be a fine teacher, but I really think you should go to seminary. And so sometimes it's those outside voices as a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old trying to figure out how can I make an impact. At that time it was, how can I change the world? What are those those aspects of my life? But then shaping to say, being a pastor is a calling, but not because of what I do, just what I do when I'm wearing the robes or where I'm wearing the calling, but it's how I conduct myself when I am on the soccer pitch and coach 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and make mistakes there too. Of course, I've been known to yell at a referee or two when I've thought something was very unjust or unfair, right? But then, and so just a funny little aside on that, Ira, is I realized that my son was becoming the adult when he had to calm me down one time. He said, Dad, I got this. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, and I backed away, let him as the captain at that time kind of step in and say what he needed to do, and then have the questions. And that's it. Maybe I did something there. You kind of hope every once in a while, and in the midst of mistakes and growth through that. So, which of those calling stories do you think you might pull up first?
I think Trish Michaels.
Yeah.
Working as an anesthesiologist, and just understanding how deeply grounded she is in the work that she does, and just how important it is. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. And so we'll just take a moment now and to share that.
I say a lot of prayers in my head. I pray sometimes for my patients to have good recoveries, to have a good experience, to go home to a safe home. There are days when I know I have a very sick patient, or a really difficult procedure to get them through, that I say my prayers that God will help guide my hands and my skills to help this child have the best outcome they can have. And I'm very grateful and thankful that when I drive home, I'm usually saying thankful to God, or thank you to God for helping me through that. My name is Patricia Michaels, and I am a pediatric anesthesiologist at Shriners Hospital for Children. Children they're much more open, I think, than adults. They're these wonderful, innocent little people, and they have a whole world to grow up and explore, and I just want to help them, and in some ways protect them. I can't protect the whole world, but I think that's why I love working with kids. Some of the biggest challenges in my career, so specifically doing pediatric anesthesia, is you have to, when you meet with the families, you have to talk both at the child's level, depending on their age and their understanding of what's happening, as well as convey the information the parents need in the most non-threatening, non-scary way possible. Because the parents need to have much more in-depth conversation with you about the details of what we're doing, the risks and the benefits, explaining the reasons why we might want to put an epidural in and the risks of having that, but it's a pain relief process for kids having a big hip surgery. And you want to have that conversation without frightening the child as well, especially once they're about 5 years old and older, because they are listening. You might think that they're just playing their video game, but they are listening to every word. That's a big challenge, and that's a day-to-day, every single case, every single kid I take care of, that's a challenge. Seeing kids that had been treated inappropriately or abused and having to care for them, and then having to send them out of the hospital and hope they would be okay. There were very difficult times. And cancer, that was very hard also. And it was just soul crushing to take care of an 18-month-old with a horrible brain tumor. And it makes you doubt your faith. How could this happen? This beautiful little baby with a horrible diagnosis and a horrible set of things we have to put them through. It was very challenging. And I'll admit I cried. I cried with the parents. I'd cried with my patients. I'd go home and sometimes cry. But I don't think there's any other way to get the emotions out. But at the end of the day, you were there to learn to take care of those kids and do the best thing you could for them. Get them through their surgeries, provide them pain relief, provide them a face and a person that will be right there with them. It's one of the most important things in pediatric anesthesia, is to meet with the child, with their parents, and then hopefully establish a rapport, and then the kids can learn to trust you and know you will be there for them the whole time during their surgery. And then that you will give them back to their parents when you're done. I get it when a mom can't stop crying because I have her baby's coming with me to the operating room, and I know, now that I'm a parent, I know there's nothing else I can say to her to make it better until she's holding her child again. And it doesn't matter whether they're 2 weeks old or 12 years old. And I didn't understand that, really emotionally understand that, until I had my own kids. And some of them will remind you of your own child. And when you're working on a kid that looks like your own, you have to take a couple big deep breaths, relax, put yourself in your kind of professional mode, get the job done as best you can, and then you do the emotional part later. And sometimes it's come home and hug your own kids. I've been lucky enough that I was raised in a household where we attended church and I learned about God and I had a faith. And it's always been there, no matter which church I've been going to, I've always had a faith in God. So I feel lucky I've always had that. I haven't had a time in my life where I didn't. I've had times where I've questioned things, but I've never lacked faith. I think having a faith and learning about, I don't know if I want to call it mentoring or working with others, ministering to others, but there's some type of core of helping other people, being there for others. And all along, even though some of my jobs are, grocery store, checkout, carry your bags, I always wanted to help and work with other people. And whether that was, I think it was part of my faith growing up. I remember my parents specifically at church, and we grew up very poor. We were on food stamps at one point. They always gave money to the collections. And they told us that no matter how poor we are, someone else has it worse. And it's something that, whether watching them always give a little bit, always make an extra sandwich for someone who needed a lunch. So growing up with them, growing up attending church with a faith in God and helping others, and the good feeling you get from that, that probably did play a big role in my career to work with other people.
Well, I want to loop back. I want to loop back a little bit to talk about why there's actually a greater need today for people to be in touch with their calling than ever before. It's actually something that has entered into mainstream conversation. The world of business has become more and more concerned about calling. And I think it's because the fact that the world has become more complex in many ways, and the individual has so many choices now. We are truly interconnected, and so this idea that we can just play a role and work through a career based upon fitting a predefined role isn't working very well, because businesses are not thriving by just emulating what's been done in the past. And so the movement now, historically businesses had to have a vision statement, they had to have a mission statement. But now the top business schools in the world are addressing this idea that to be successful in business, you have to first figure out what your calling is, and then apply that calling to developing a vision and a mission. And that you have to discover how you are meant to be in order to figure out the secondary of how to apply it and bring your highest contribution to the world. The world of business is about going back to what Buckminster Fuller said, is the universe doesn't owe me a living. I have to find a problem that I have a solution to, and then the universe will support me. And he discovered that at a very low point in his life. And we all know he went on to do some pretty remarkable things, but he was literally standing on the shores of Lake Michigan and contemplating the end of his life, because he had been a failure up to that point. And he had this sudden realization that, you know what, I have to solve a problem that needs to be solved. I need to figure out what I am best at doing for the benefit of others. And so one of the things that's fascinating about the callings conversation, both from a spiritual and a business perspective, is that it addresses this issue that I know you've broached the subject before of, do we do what makes us happy, or do we do what is of benefit to others? And you could argue, say, am I doing it for my happiness, or am I doing it for the happiness of others? And the calling is way above that. It's, a hobby is something you do for pure pleasure of yourself. A career, a vocation is something that is greater than that. That isn't about the momentary joy, but rather the deeper, that deeper grounded experience of life.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there, Ira, because, and it is interesting. I've been noticing even in responses during this pandemic about how businesses are trying to respond to it. I would almost say what used to be the secular realm and the spiritual realm, as long as you don't call it spiritual, or as long as you don't call it religious, what I really do see businesses doing often now is trying to find that higher sense of calling, of what I'm trying to think of specific examples. It's even just what I heard on the news of how they are entering to say, we've received, I think those effective businesses, we've been blessed by being able to maintain our business during this pandemic, and so we want to reach out to some who have not, because that is our responsibility. We see some returning sense of a different business ethic that I think may have been missing for a while, where it's not all just about profit anymore, where I think for a long time businesses saw their ultimate calling always as about profit. And I don't think that's true for a number of businesses anymore, and more businesses. At least that's the hope I have in the midst of this, though I know that connection to stakeholders and to still exists. And if you don't find where that can connect, you can be in a lot of trouble business wise. The other thing that what you were saying makes me think of, that I'd be curious about as we kind of go down this road a little bit, is you and I meet in a group we call the Gen X group, but I thinking about the millennials. Millennials really, on the one hand, right, they're criticized for acts of entitlement, and but on the other hand, I think they get some of this a little bit earlier than I did. At least you can speak for yourself about how I want the way I make and earn a living to also match up with what I believe about the world.
I
Um,
love millennials.
you're teaching them or have taught.
I love them. I mean, yes, there are things that the stereotypical descriptions can be applied to a lot of characteristics, but that's only if you judge those characteristics against the measure of what the world was like for you.
Yeah,
And
right.
the world for our millennials is very different than the world you and I grew up in.
Yep.
And the thing that gives me the greatest hope for the millennial and zennial generations is this reconnection to the idea of authenticity, that they are not overly impressed with uh, doing things just for profit. They are looking for meaningful life experiences. I think they're a little sheltered and perhaps a little disconnected from the physical world right now. And I think this is something that they'll have to experience going forward. But they are very much tied into making meaningful relationships and having a purpose driven life, and for that reason alone I admire it, not to mention the fact that you can't help but admire somebody that's willing to hit the concrete trying to do a skateboard jump, and they get up over and over and over and over until they master it. And I think that any individual that can put that much passion, that much effort into doing something well will make a positive difference in the world.
Yeah. That's, yeah. I know these are broad generalizations anytime you start talking about generations, but I think you're right. Just the world has changed so much since we were kids to see they almost have to work harder to receive, on the one hand, to receive the same financial gain maybe than we did, but at the same time, the groundedness that they have in the midst of those relationships and a very different way of relating in the world. I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful than I think that purpose-driven life will, in a sense, come and meet them and help them as they transition from their 30s into middle age to old age. I'll be curious to see what books are written when you and I are 80 and looking back to see, boy, how did these things, maybe we'll have to revisit a podcast when we're 80 and
Yeah.
see what those things look like. But,
well, it's interesting. The businesses that will survive are the ones that have strong relationships with their customers. And that's where the customer driven economy is compelling businesses to be a little more transparent, a little more authentic, a little more relatable. In business, we talk about the customer has to know you, like you, and trust you.
mm-hmm.
And with so many choices out there, you have to build meaningful relationships. And I'm seeing that the businesses that I'm engaged with during this stay shelter, they're thriving because they already had that groundwork. And so I think there's going to be a lot of examination in the professional world of what businesses made it and what businesses didn't make it. And it's interesting, going back to what you said some a little bit earlier, the word religion is one that we tend to avoid in the secular world. But when you think about the meaning of the word is
Mm-hmm.
to reconnect.
Yeah.
That really, we're talking about getting everything in alignment to be able to connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so then, and I think the more we can do that, when things are well, the better we're able to do that when things aren't going so well. So in the midst of, if we can be connected when, things are humming along fine, when things push us off path, I think, and that's where calling again, I think, comes in. That higher sense of calling helps recenter us in the midst when things around us are tumultuous. It grounds us once again to say, we're going to be okay here. It gives us a longer view back in history to go, yeah, we're not the first ones that have gone through these things. And then as we move forward to say, and who knows what opportunities and options this is going to open up for us in the future. The other, the other choice I suppose you have to take is I'm just going to fold it all in. But I think when we have a sense of, of that vision of God, of one who loves and one who is gracious, or one who is there to walk beside us and support us, instead of this one that is just looking for that mistake we're going to make, it changes our aspect of how we live our lives into old age, and allows us to make mistakes more graciously in the sense of calling, but also to be bolder. The kind of a big quote that Luther is sort of ascribed to is "Sin boldly, knowing that grace all the more abounds." And to me, in a sense, that's what we're called to do, is make our mistakes and with our best intent of figuring out what God might be calling us in all of who we are to do, in all of who we are to be, and make our mistakes in that, knowing all the more that grace abounds, that with that intentional conversations and relationships with one another, that's to me where that Spirit of God is just sitting and moving and celebrating with us in our day-to-day lives.
Well, and as we are having this conversation, the sun is shining. Yeah. The early spring leaves are sprouting on the trees, that yellow green of early growth. And it is hard not to just be in awe of the gifts that we are given if we can just maintain our awareness. And it's a wonderful, wonderful world we live in that is a great gift from God.
Yeah, so much gratitude. That's one of the things I'm learning from you, Ira, so I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we will look for you next time on The Spiritual Hedgehog.
Thank you for joining us today on The Spiritual Hedgehog. For show notes and more information, go to www.thespiritualhedgehog.com.